Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felicia Henry. I'm the Director of Operations at Courtney's House.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jody Haskin. I'm the Anti-Trafficking Program Manager at the International Organization for Adolescents, otherwise known as IOFA. And IOFA is based in Chicago and is the OVW training and technical assistance provider on issues relating to youth sex trafficking. So IOFA has been working for almost 20 years to end the trafficking and exploitation of children and youth through programming to empower and protect young people. And we partner in this work with our host today, Courtney's House, who is located in Washington, D.C. And Courtney's House takes a holistic approach to healing and work with each child on an individual basis. So they use counseling and therapy, group interactions to support the child's recovery. They use survivor support groups that are open to boys, girls, and transgender survivors. Their focus is on trauma recovery, education, and life skills, along with other things like fun and therapeutic activities, including dance, art, and yoga, among other activities. In addition, each survivor has access to influential mentors and academic tutoring. So Courtney's House also recognizes that the survivors' non-offending parents and guardians have a key role in the recovery process, and that they, too, need healing, so also have supportive services. I would like to also introduce our speakers for today. First, we have Tina Front, who is the founder and executive director of Courtney's House. Tina herself is a survivor of domestic sex trafficking and now dedicates her life to survivors to heal from domestic sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. She founded Courtney's House in August of 2008, and between her and her organization, they've helped more than 600 individuals through their drop-in center and programs. She also trains law enforcement and other nonprofit groups to help and provide resources to victims and survivors. She is a member of the Washington, D.C. Anti-Trafficking Task Force and Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force. She's been featured on numerous national television shows and publications, including The Oprah Show, The Montel Williams Show, CNN, and Redbook. In 2010, she was awarded the Frederick Douglass Award. This award is given to individuals who have survived slavery and is using their life and freedom to help others. She's also testified before the U.S. Congress about her own experiences and the need for greater protection and services for trafficked persons. Next, we have our second presenter, who is Felicia Henry, and you heard from her earlier. She's the operations manager of Courtney's House, and she's also the chair of the First Responders Training Committee for the Prince George's County Human Trafficking Task Force. This is the task force responsible for training first responders on identification, direct services available for survivors, investigative tactics to prosecute offenders, and case management tools. And she's also completed a graduate fellowship with Courtney's House and then was hired on to serve as the director of operations. Felicia Henry oversees all aspects of operations for the drop-in center. We're very excited to have both of these presenters here on the webinar, and you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Jody. So we're going to get started. So I want to start out by just speaking to or doing a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today. And I also want you all to think of some questions as Tina and I, as we continue through the webinar, because we will have a 20 to 30 minute question and answer at the end of today's training. So no question is off limits, and please feel free to let us know what you may want more information on or any questions that you may have about what we're talking about today. So starting at the top, we're going to, of course, be talking about youth sex trafficking and doing an overview of trauma and what that looks like. Number two, we're going to take a look into African American history in the U.S. and its correlation to human trafficking. Third, we're going to talk very deeply about understanding the African American community and how to provide direct services to traffic youth. And last, we're going to talk about how to engage and how to outreach with African American youth who are sex trafficking survivors. So, as I said, the first section for today is youth sex trafficking and trauma, and Tina is going to start off with that section. Well, hello, everyone. I want to first say that when we talk about culture,
Hi, Tina. I'm not sure if you can hear us, but I think your audio cut out. So if you'd like to just hang up and redial again, we can get you reconnected.
Okay, just testing.
Okay, perfect. You're back on. Thank you.
Okay, my apologies. I hope everyone can hear me now. So when we talk about culture, I believe sometimes we leave out African American in the culture competency piece. We think of maybe that African Americans are American, and so we add in the culture. But sometimes when we're providing services, there is a disconnect. So today, we're going to focus a lot on specifically that and what that looks like. So as you all know about trauma, we know that it's an overwhelming experience beyond one's control. And we're going to find out today how that kind of plays in contact with everyday living and what African American culture, what you are kind of taught about what trauma is and what mental health is. I think it's really good to have a better understanding. That way the services can be connected better. And also the youth will be able to actually, or adult will be able to actually understand your perspective on it as well. A lot of times it leaves you feeling hopeless and what your trauma is like. Well, so the thing is, most of our youth who have experienced a lot of trauma, and especially those who are African American, what we see the most is anger, right? And we see the anger, the hostility more, and we see more of a disturb on everything. So not one specific thing, but all things, and it comes out a little angry. Sometimes when things come off angry, we as service providers don't know how to address that. As you all know, the trauma destroys one's belief in safe and our world around it and what safety is. But culture does play a significant role in how trauma is identified. So we're going to talk a lot about what that is and about our history with trauma and social, and also what family culture means as well. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about to me is very important, and this is United States history and connection to human trafficking. Now, I want you all to think, because I know that we've all heard that trafficking is slavery, and a lot of people say that it's modern-day slavery. Now, I will be very honest with you and tell you that most African Americans don't like this statement, and I'm going to explain to you why and what the connection really is and why I do think it's slavery in the aspect to what the rules are. So what slavery looked like and what I'm referring to as the rules. Slavery was divide and conquer, and it was really built on abuse and manipulation and routine to trauma. So maybe your connection to what I'm saying first will be, of course, it's slavery, Tina, because people were sold. I want to break down the rules so you can have a better understanding of what I mean by divide and conquer and what that plays a role in. Slavery isn't just a specific part of an action. It can be a mindset and a divide and conquer. Now let me explain what that means. 200 years ago in slavery, there was slavery and then there was an overseer. The overseer was actually African American. So the overseer was picked by the slave master. And when the slave master picked the overseer, I want you to think of this. How was the overseer picked? Was the overseer picked by the weakest or the strongest? So think about this. The slave master has to pick one slave that has a false sense of security. A false sense of security means that they're going to oversee the other slave. Do you pick the strongest or the weakest person for that? I'm going to let you think about that for a second. So a lot of people may say that obviously you pick the weakest person. Well, that's not a true statement, and I want you to think about that. You pick the strongest person. The reason why you pick the strongest person is that you pick the strongest person to manipulate and control in front of everyone. And then when everyone else doesn't listen, you punish that person who is the overseer, and you use them as an example, as what they did 200 years ago. But now jump to now and say that a bottom is a person that also has this false sense. A false sense means that they're under a controlling situation, and they are being controlled by the trafficker. However, they think they have choices, meaning sometimes, and 200 years ago, they could sleep on the floor. Sometimes they got the scraps of the food. Sometimes they were able to sit on a horse. We'll jump to now. A bottom sometimes sleeps next to a trafficker. A bottom sometimes is able to keep the ones, the dollar bills only sometimes, if the trafficker says that. So that goes back to our abuse and manipulation of having a false sense of control. Now, do we start to understand a little bit of what I mean by some of the rules of slavery and how those rules are the major pieces of getting you thinking that you are involved in something that you're not and what the slavery really is. So let's go back to our 200 years again and kind of make another connection of that. When we're saying 200 years ago and the control, the next aspect is the name. Well, see, slave owners named the slaves. When you're with a trafficker, each trafficker that you're with renames you. Now, when they rename you, I want you to think of this. What I mean by rename is they look at you and say, you know, your name is going to be Sunshine. Your name is going to be Precious. They name you. You don't get to pick it. Each one names it. What does that sound like? It sounds like slavery. In the beginning years, the same thing happened, where they named them. Each trafficker renames you. So that's why you see all these different names that you don't pick, or sometimes people refer to them as having different tattoos with the names. The next thing is that all traffickers say that they have a stable of either women or boys or girls, and they're a stable. What else is a stable? What's kept in a stable? Farm animals. So farm animals are kept in a stable. That would take us back 200 years ago. Where were the slaves' records kept? Do you guys know where their records were kept when they were born? Think about that for a minute. Right. So their records were actually kept where the farm animals' records were kept. So that's why hundreds of years ago, when they were looking up and trying to track their ancestry back to slavery, we had to look in where the livestock was kept at that time. That would hence the word stable. Now, do we all understand and getting to understand how those rules of slavery still applies today? And think about that, because those same rules were used to keep us in slavery is what the traffickers are using to keep them in slavery today. The same rules. And that's really important to understand, because if we can't understand that, we can't understand how to provide services to them to break through this slave mentality of thinking that we've all were taught. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on to break down what else that looks like. So I want to break down a few more rules so you can understand how it's embedded. Now, just because as a survivor I'm understanding how it's embedded, it took me years to actually understand that. So understanding how we have to kind of put this knowledge into services so that they have a better understanding too. So let's go back and see the manipulation. Now let's go back to our other rules of slavery. Now we already talked about how their own slaves in slavery times were overseeing and they were watching, which also means that they were actually going back. Now I want you to think about this. Some plantations had up to 200 slaves, but they were actually owned by sometimes families that were at war. So maybe 4 or 5, sometimes 10 people were actually slave masters. Think about that, because that 200 slaves outnumbers the 10 to 15 people that were overseeing them. That's very important because that mind control. See, they could have did a Django and burnt the whole place down and left, but they didn't because they had to keep them in their mind. So let's go back to how they left slavery. So back in the day when they were singing the songs of freedom and the slaves were singing songs that they were leaving, the overseer was going right back to the slave master and saying, hey, you know they're getting ready to leave, right? That's the song that tells them. So the reason he said something that overseer had to go back is this. So when all the people were caught or not caught, they would take the overseer who was a slave, and that person would get beat in front of all the 200 slaves or how many slaves was on that plantation. And I want you to think about that for a moment. Because what actually happens is the other slaves say, well, I'm not leaving because I'm not going to have that happen to me. Or they say, oh, that's not going to happen to me, so I'm going to stay here. And I want you to think about that because actually that's the mentality today. So how does that work today? Well, that works today because the bottom, if you don't come in, the other people don't come in with enough money, then the bottom, or the person who's actually been there the longest, it could be 2 weeks is the longest, gets beat in front of everybody. And that mentality of, and I said it, and every female that I know and have worked with who is in the life says this next statement. Well, it probably wouldn't happen to me because they're so nice to me. Because at first, they're so extremely nice to you that you could not believe that that would ever happen. And then that piece right there contributes to our mindset of slavery and what that mindset truly looks like on there. So I want you to think about that. Now, if that wasn't broken down to you, it is extremely difficult for not only adults but also youth to even recognize that sort of control and how it will play into their trauma as well. Don't forget to write questions down. This was a lot of information, but don't worry. We're going to go into this some more because right now we're going to connect it and also talk about our barriers of engagement with the African American youth. Because all of these things that you've learned, how does this take play into their trauma and healing? So our next piece, our barriers of engagement with youth. Distrust, distant, aggressive, silent, stigma, and isolation. So I want to express this. Now let's go back to our slavery that we just talked about and pull out some of these pieces in here and our barriers to engage in the distrust. Well, you would distrust people. I think this is a pretty easier one to get, that you're going to obviously distrust people when you can't even see how you were manipulated. And I just want people to marinate on that. Just because we can see how the youth or adult that we're working with was manipulated doesn't mean they can see it, right? So how do you walk them through this process of seeing someone else's distrust, right? But connecting it to how they're going to work with you on the distrust part. Because everything we just went over with the manipulation would be extremely difficult for them to see, right? It would take a while to walk through that. The next piece is the distance. Well, the distance goes hand in hand with the distrust, right? Of distrusting someone and being distant because of what they went through and the aggressiveness. When we talk about what stress levels are and what depression is, do we ever talk about with the youth that we work with or the adult that we work with about that aggression and being aggressive is also part of depression? When we think about depression, our youth thinks about the TV that they saw and the ad they saw on TV. How everyone just walked around with their heads sad, maybe did a tear. They were just looking at the ground with sad music, and everyone's just sad. But we don't connect it to being aggressive, right? You would be aggressive and angry if you are hidden in plain sight, I say. Every day you had trauma, you were sex trafficked, you were abused, but people judge you on the color of your skin. And because they're judging you of your color of your skin and expecting you to do something that you may not even want to do or even thought of doing, your depression quickly turns into aggression and being aggravated and being upset and not being able to understand why. And I don't think we really kind of think about that. All the history of what goes on with African Americans as well, connected to trauma and sex trafficking and the disbelief. So we think of, yes, of course, being sad and depressed, but not attaching, I think, at times that aggression with it. Then there has the silence. There is a silent stigma, especially within the African American community, and I'm sure many of you know that, especially with depression and even trafficking. You know, in our community, we think outward in trafficking, meaning it happens outside of our community, but not inside our community at all. The stigma and the isolation, those barrier as well. Isolation in a different sense. Isolation doesn't mean that you are isolated in a room all by yourself. You can be with lots of people around you, isolated in the belief that this isn't going on, that no one believes you, that no one understands what you've been going through, that you don't have another person to talk to about it, feeling like you can't get out of a situation at all. That can also be isolation. So thinking of it like that. The other piece to this is that we're talking heavily, and I keep saying traffickers, but this doesn't mean pimps. What we see the most of is family-controlled trafficking within the whole family. So that's very important, especially on the slave mentality, right? Because if it's embedded throughout your whole family, your mama, your grandmother, we're all in the life, then the stigma and the isolation that you have is from your family from leaving the life. And think about it that way, because a lot of our youth were trafficked by their family. And that connection is very different, because that isolation is your family putting you down for not being in the light. And then how are we doing services, right? Understanding that they can never have a family connection again. It's a lot to think about. And it will also take us to our next piece. So with all this information we're getting, don't worry, we're going to have lots of comments and lots of questions. But the next piece to this is outreach. And Felicia is going to talk a lot more about that.
Thank you, Tina. And so when we talk about outreach and coming off of what Tina was just talking about, right? You have a survivor that is new to your program and they're demonstrating very aggressive behavior. So you're like, okay, how do I engage? You know, I don't want to continue to escalate them. How do I de-escalate that situation? And so one of the ways that we found that not only starts to develop a rapport, but also allows us to continue to build a very genuine relationship is how we outreach to the youth that are in our program. And because we work specifically with youth, we knew that we needed to meet them where they are. So, of course, that means social media. And so we have did a great job of getting our Instagram page very active. And then I'm going to go back to that in a little bit. Facebook, and usually Instagram and Facebook. But with Instagram, we found that, of course, you all may be aware that it has a chat feature. And so we started a survivor chat. As survivors come into our program, and once they are connected, we actually use that as a means to engage with them daily as it relates to case management. And then also, from a crisis intervention standpoint, our survivors will reach out to us through Instagram if they're in crisis. So we found that we wanted to be relative to their demographic, their age group, and we found that social media was a great tool to do that. I think what it also does is, in terms of how the chat functions, it also allows them to get to know the other survivors that are here. And so you all may not know that we specifically work with trafficked youth. So everyone that's at Courtney's house has all gone through the same thing. And I think for African American youth, when they're already stigmatized and a lot of them don't have an understanding of consent, and, you know, by the time they come to us, they've been to 3 or 4 or 5 programs, that when they come here, they see faces that look like them, they see youth who are close in age to them, and we see that that matters because they're more likely to open up and they feel safe to be vulnerable with us. So it also allows them to engage with other survivors that are in the program as well. So that way, when Jasmine is kind of like, you know, we like, where's Jasmine? All the survivors can hit Jasmine up, and they're like, Jasmine, what's up? Like, I haven't seen you. When you come in a group, when's the next time you're coming into the drop-in center? It really just allows us to keep that mode of communication as frequent as possible. So definitely try your best to incorporate an internet presence that is very youth-friendly, because they do actually utilize it a great deal. So this question is really important. Is your imagery and language inclusive in your material online and in your physical service space? So another way that we utilize social media when we're trying to outreach to our survivors is through our introduction phase. So when we are new to having someone who's referred to Courtney's house, we encourage the social worker or whomever is making that introduction to tell them to look us up on Instagram. Look us up on Instagram, and they do it. You know, they pull out their phones, they go on our Instagram, they're seeing different things that we post, and of course, a lot of things that we post shows our daily activities at our drop-in center. It shows the field trips that we have. It shows the fun activities. And we're in this space where they don't want to hear that you're just another service provider that they want to come to and discuss their feelings, right? It has to be something different. So we definitely utilize our social media through the introduction phase after we receive the referral, because they're trying to figure us out. They have questions. They're unsure. So we found that they go on our Instagram, they look us up, they see Tina, they see some of the staff, and again, that starts to just build that rapport. In addition to that, we also, they can call us through Instagram as well, through like a video chat. So let's say they're with their social worker, and their social worker may say, hey, let's go on their Instagram page together. And let's say we may have an introduction scheduled for that particular day. Again, the social worker or whoever, the clinician, could call us through Instagram, and we just utilize Instagram for that feature as well through early on introductions. For the physical service space, the cornerstone and headquarters to our survivor services program definitely is our drop-in center. And it's non-residential, so no one actually lives there, but it's open for about 8 hours per day, Monday through Thursday, and on Saturdays for about 6 hours when we have support groups. And so what we found is when survivors come into our physical space, actually we're in and I should mention this, we're in a house. So we're in a residential zoned development. So Tina found out very early on that a lot of our survivors pray for families, right? When we're talking about youth being in a family-controlled situation or youth that are in foster care, a lot of them do pray for families. So Tina knew that she wanted our drop-in center to have the energy of a very family-oriented environment. So when you step into our drop-in center, we get all the time, oh my God, it feels so homey in here. The energy is so nice. You know, again, always think about how can we present ourselves in a different way. because 9 times out of 10, we're dealing with youth who are in the foster care system or who are already connected to service providers, or maybe they're not in foster care. But they already have some experience with receiving some sort of social service. And we do so well because our approach is very different. You know, we're in a house. We're not in a commercial facility. When you come in our home or in our drop-in center, you know, we have a no-shoe policy. So we ask everyone to take off their shoes. Again, something that, you know, it's a very nuanced thing. But I think when they come in, they're like, oh, I got to take my shoes off? Yeah, because this is your home. We want you to feel comfortable, and we also want to keep it clean, too. Right, exactly. And then I guess the other thing that we do is, you all know, you may have a youth in your program who may leave home or may leave their placement lot. So that also, you know, makes it a little harder for you to, you know, catch feet and leave, you know, if you don't have your shoes on your feet. But I think those small details about our drop-in center, how we decorate the drop-in center, we have daily activities at the drop-in center, you know, when we have things like Halloween, when we have things like Thanksgiving, and again, in the African-American community, these are all the holidays that they have grown into, and it's become a norm. It's become a social norm for them. So when you come into our drop-in center now, you see all the Halloween decorations. When it's Thanksgiving, you're going to see some Thanksgiving decorations, and we have our Thanksgiving meal. When it's holidays, sometimes we don't do too heavy Christmas because we have some survivors who may be Muslim or they may be a Jehovah's Witness, so we may just do a Halloween theme. But again, we always are putting ourselves in a position of what would they want, what would make them feel comfortable. So always ask yourself as you're developing your outreach plans, if I am a 16-year-old, what would really interest me? In addition to that, we do have a street outreach, but I'm just going to touch on briefly because it's really outside of the internet presence. But again, if anybody has any street outreach programs, that is another way to connect with youth, but that goes back to the rules conversation that Tina was talking about earlier. With African-American youth, particularly if it's a pimp control situation, there are specific rules that are abided by on the street. So our street outreach program is much different because we realize there are certain things that you can do and certain things that you can't do. And again, even out on the street, the rules still apply. And when survivors see that you know the rules, that's going to incentivize them to talk to you. So just wanted to briefly include that, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is Tina. Okay, we're back. Understanding youth and African American culture can improve a staff's perspective of youth they serve. So I really want to kind of break down some of the language and culture and how we incorporate. I want to go back and quickly say 85% of our population is African American at Courtney's house, and then the other 15% is Latina. Today we're just focusing on the African American culture. So, and we have a full food menu at Courtney's house. Because I serve a African American and Latina population, we try to mix up the foods, mix up the movies, mix up the activities that we do. So I encourage people. I think sometimes we are quick to understand the Native American community, the Indian community, the Latina community, but then again we leave out the African American culture and community. I want to merge them, right? It's more of a family. So the language you use even with staff is important. What does language and culture look like in the African American community? So some of the words I don't use. I came from the foster care system in Chicago, Illinois, and because I came from a foster care system and my trafficking situation started originally inside the foster care, we don't use words like case manager. We use SSC, Survivor Service Coordinator. Everything we do here is intentional, and it's actually for the survivors. It's a message to them, not us. I think that's difficult when you're in a program that was already kind of created, right, and established, and they have a certain way of already doing things. I say every 10 years,
you have to switch how you do your programs and services. It has to go more culture, and it just has to go to that population that you're serving, because every 10 years you will have to. You're not going to get the youth the same way you got them 10 years ago. Things are going to change. And so because of that, the language is important. So saying SSC and not case manager. Well, the reason why is that we talked to youth, and actually how I came up with SSC originally 10 years ago was actually through survivors in our program. And I was thinking I didn't want to do what every organization did. What everyone said is, this is what we do. This is what we normally do. I knew that I wasn't comfortable with that word, but I wanted to make sure that the words were right. And what the youth told us was that they weren't a case. And they felt like case managers was just that. It made them feel like a case. I wanted to build a family because we had a negative meaning of what a family is and needed to learn what a positive family does. And with that being said, that language is important because the language that we've learned. So I know that maybe some of us aren't too familiar with how much our language changes anyway with youth on a daily basis. One word that was cool 10 minutes ago isn't cool anymore, and the language changes up. So I am not telling you to switch and learn languages, but I am telling you to do homework. And homework is important. It is very important to understand what the youth are talking about. Many of our girls, because we serve boys and girls, used to tell me all the time how upsetting it was because the boys would talk about their trafficking situations in front of case managers, quote unquote, but they wouldn't know what they were talking about because they didn't understand the language that they were using and didn't understand the culture. And so then people did more terms as maybe they're, survival sex, and maybe this is something else than what it is. So for me, our language is different in culture because of a few things. So now I want to talk about some of the barriers and things we work on with the youth of their own culture that they had to deal with. And one is most of our youth at Courtney's house, I want to say a good 90%, identify as LGBTQI at Courtney's house, and mostly the females. I would say most of the males do not define, but most of the females do. Well, the issue is that some of the males who do not define have asked us more questions about going to hell, and that you can be a murderer and you can be a rapist, but you cannot be gay. So I had case managers come to me and say that there was an issue, and this is outside of Courtney's house, so case managers, with the survivor we were working with, thinking these things and how they tried to come at it. Well, the reason why they said this, and my response was, this is what I grew up in the African-American community. This is unfortunately what I grew up with. So because of that, it would be very different and very difficult for someone who was Caucasian to start saying things like, no, that's not true, and no, don't believe that, because of the culture that we grew up in. So because of that, we do talk about this in our support groups, and we talk about it all the time at Courtney's house about being who you are and how sometimes the statements don't make sense, how to research things, how to, if you are who you are and happy with who you are, that's okay. But it also sometimes has to come from someone who looks like them, because they're not going to believe, they're not even going to believe you understand that's how they grew up, and they shut down on it. And it's a thing that we see a lot with the African-American culture. And being African-American has to work through and understand. So those are one thing, especially how they may talk about things. The other thing that we hear the most is that our survivors, and actually we had a group about this, and the group discussion about this was about some of our survivors. I'll tell you, the Latina survivors said they do not like Latino men and they don't date them. Some of the survivors who are also Caucasian said they don't date white men. Some of our African-American survivors said they do not like African people. So I think sometimes we stop right there at that statement and we try to address that a different way. Here's what I saw and heard out of it. When I talked to all of our youth with that statement, because I thought the same thing, my father who adopted me is white. And when I first was adopted at 13, the first thing I thought was, oh, my God, all white guys have sex with black girls. Now, did that happen? No. Would it have ever happened? No, that's not who he was. But why did I think that? And let me explain why. Because the men were predominantly white. So I would say I hated white men. But that wasn't a true statement. I hated the men who bought sex from me. So all of our youth in our program were actually saying these things because, and we associated it back to their trafficking situation. So I went back and asked them, what were most of the men that were buying sex for them? And it was all the races they said they didn't like. See, the problem is that we can't understand our own trauma. We're not able to understand our own trauma and to explain it when we're going through it. So these are really important conversations and how we address those issues of them saying these words and what it really means. So what actually happened in that conversation is that most of them didn't even understand why they really didn't like them, right? It wasn't really the race, right? It's those men continuously that they're saying. So sometimes when you're hearing statements like that, it is so good to start working with them and asking different questions and not putting your perspective of what you think it may be. And what I mean is this. Many people, another case manager actually was like, oh, she has race issues, and I'm just going to explain to her and talk to her about the race and issue. Well, this was way more about the men who were buying sex, and usually it is with our population of why they say that. So just looking at a lens a different way and having them to even explain and talk about it instead of you as a service provider putting your emotional feeling into it, feeling how they're really feeling and what they're really trying to say about that situation. Now, how might African American language and culture be perceived negatively by service providers? I also want to make it very clear at Courtney's house, most of our youth, I'm looking at Felicia to make sure, but I'm going to say a good half, so maybe a good 50, I would even say 60%, have hit their case managers, spit on their case managers or service providers previously more than 5 times, have maybe been in a mental health lockdown facility and beat up the staff members. That is definitely my population. So most of our youth have been very, very, very aggressive. But I can honestly tell you something, they have not been aggressive with us. So let's talk about the language and culture. Some of the things, the reasons why they were angry. And a lot of times the people were of a different race that they got upset with. And a few things were. In African-American culture, sometimes service providers, I think, see a red flag when people get really loud, right? Maybe start clapping their hands a little bit. They get a little excited. And they're getting more aggressive in their language. So we tend, as service providers, to get on the defensive. What I train our staff on is not to show anything. Do not change your tone. You can't change your tone. It is so hard not to change your tone. I promise, I know. But if you change your tone, in the African American culture, you get a little bit a higher octave, then you're arguing with me. And I'm baiting you to do it. I am actually assuming that you're going to do it anyway. So I'm baiting you. I'm coming towards you. I am saying some things, yes. But I'm baiting you, and I'm getting you aggressive to prove a point that I can go, see, I already knew. This is what they're going to do. So I'm baiting you on. So it's very difficult, it is, but you have to keep very calm. You have to keep your tone even, because one higher octave will change that whole conversation to violence, because now I think you're being combative with me. Now you're giving me a reason. So I think a lot of times, sometimes service providers see this, right, and they don't know how to get out of it. It is a sticky situation. And you can't predict, like I tell the kids, you can't predict crazy, right? But the tone, to me, is one of the things that calms them down because you didn't get agitated and you're not getting upset, right? The other thing that I hear that a lot of service providers do to our youth is follow them when they're upset to calm them down, right? Like they're going out into the street or they're walking out of your service and you just want to make sure they're okay and follow. No. Following is very difficult because then think about it this way. If you're following me and I'm angry and upset, that might just irritate me a little bit more, right? And not de-escalate a situation or keep telling me that you're sorry, or saying things like, I wasn't sex trafficked, but I was sexually assaulted. These things are not the same thing. Like, that's what we have sometimes. So we're trying our best to de-escalate a situation. In the African American community, you deem it more as you're trying to be like me. Like, I know that's not how we feel, but that's what they think, because this is what we talk to them the most about, and then why they get so upset with their triggers of it. So those are some of the things. No following. Let them calm down. I like to talk to the youth and talk about triggers, but put it up on the wall. Point to it. Like, ask them, like, how do you, when you get angry and upset, what do you need to calm down before I talk to you? You know, and really put that into what you all call as a safety plan. But do this beforehand and put it in places where they can see it, where you can point at it and just remind them that it's there. And remember, you'll be able to ask lots of questions later when we're done. So the next thing, one of the other kind of culture things that we see and hear a lot. So let's talk about the big debate. The big debate is washcloth, sponges, or loofah. Think about that. That's a big debate. And why that's important. So when we pass out and give washcloths, we give 2 washcloths. Why do we give 2 washcloths? Think about it.
Post your answer
Post your answer. Why do we give 2 washcloths to predominantly African American adults or youth? Write that in the comment. Nobody won't answer. We don't know yet. So we're going to come back to that, because when we think about cultural competency, do we also think about shampoo? So when we get donations, one of the things that Courtney tells, I don't see answers yet, guys. Okay. One of the things, body and face. That's what we do. Yes. So that's really important. I'm sorry. Body and face, that is the answer. Yes. Sometimes 3. 1 for the body. Yes. Thank you, Sophia. So definitely for the body and face, but I want to go back to that next piece of what do we do for all the other items in hair care. Hair care. We all want shampoo and things donated for our organization to give away to those who need it. Things that I ask for. One thing I ask for is no small shampoos. I ask for 0, zilch of them. Please do not donate them. There'll be no need. Why? Because most of our youth, it dries our hair out. Those cheap shampoos that you don't use when you go to the hotel, the beautiful hotel, you don't use them. You just keep them to the side. That's why. I ask specifically for hair care products for our Latina and our African American population. And it's really important, because why have all these 500 shampoos that you can give away but nobody can use because it dries their hair out? Doesn't make sense, right? So you got to show people that you care. You have to have washcloths. You have to have things that they use, your Dove soap items that is culturally competent for them as well, and that they will want to come for, right? We all know that they may need something, but when you got the right thing, I promise you that starts for a beautiful conversation as well. That's going to lead us to our next piece for Felicia, which will talk mostly about mental health. I hope you guys are thinking of all those wonderful questions that you want to ask us.
Thank you, Tina. So we're going to talk about current stigma and beliefs embedded in African American history. So as Tina said, the profile of our survivors definitely are persons of color. But another characteristic that pretty much all of our survivors have is a severe level of mental health. So they may be on the cusp of the autism spectrum. They may be diagnosed as schizophrenic, PTSD, severe depression. They may be cutting. They may have several suicide attempts. They may have several mental health hospitalizations. These are all the things that our survivors deal with, that they have gone through. And so one thing that we found is the phrase of, so if a youth says to you, why do I need to come to your program? I already been to 3, 4, 5, 6 different programs. Why do I need to come there? It's nothing for me there. So the last thing that you want to say is, well,
We want to be a support for you, and we want, we're a place where you can come and you can talk about your feelings. And so that, from our experience, has been something that will quickly get you an answer of, no, I don't want to come to your program. Because going back to the slide about, what was that slide? The third or fourth slide where it had distress. It had barriers to engagement, right? They don't trust you. They don't know us. They don't know anything really about us. And the fact of the matter is, if you're saying on my first impression of you that you want me to come to your program and talk about your feelings, well, I'm thrown off because I don't even know you. So I don't even know if I even want to even come yet. So, and again, asking for help. Number one, we're dealing with children and youth who may not even understand that they're a victim of a crime, right? And so because that is the reality of where their perception is in terms of their victimization or lack of knowing that they have survived, that they're not even in a space where I want to ask for help, or I feel a level of shame. When I did ask for help, I was told I was a prostitute, or I was told, well, you could just stop, or, you're doing this on your own. There was all these negative experiences already in their mind about what happened when they did ask for help. Maybe people didn't believe them when they asked for help before. So again, until that relationship is established, really the early interactions, we don't even talk about their story. We're not even asking any questions about anything like that, because we want them to know that, this isn't just some rigid process where you're going to come in, we're going to set our papers down on the table with our pen in our hand, and we're getting ready to just typically, as probably a typical experience that they've had previously, where you just come in a room and everybody's just, taking down your name and your information. We want to do something much different. So asking for help for them is going to be difficult until they trust you. And then another stigma is taking medication. And so this is a reoccurring challenge for us as well, because our intensive case management, it's not a 60, 90-day. This is long-term. It could take years until someone's in a place where they really have transitioned their mindset. So, but what further complicates that is the reluctance to take medication, because there's this idea that it's a conspiracy. The pharmaceutical companies are trying to make money, which is, that is fact. It's a billion-dollar industry. But in the African American community, the association between me taking my medication is something that I don't want to do. And it could be a number of reasons. They're going to tell you it's going to make them gain weight. They're going to tell you it makes them sleepy. They're going to tell you that it doesn't change anything. There's no difference. They're going to have 1,000,001 reasons of why taking their medication is not going to be helpful to them. But one of the things that we have done in the past, for example, to overcome that stigma is, we'll say something like, well, sometimes it's hard to see how your behavior is different when you're in meds, because it's you, right? It's hard for you to see what you may be going through right at that moment. But you could say something to the effect of, but I have noticed that when you are taking your meds that, you're a little bit more calm, or you schedule your one-on-ones, or, just try to bring it back to some positive output that you've seen through their behavior, through your interactions if you did see a difference between when they were medication compliant and then when they were not. Because taking medication is going to be a challenge for this particular population, it is going to create significant barriers in terms of providing therapy, having consistent engagement for therapy sessions, and making sure they go to their appointments. It's going to become a barrier. But for us, we just try to work very heavily with the social worker team. We try to work with the foster parent or the parent in the home, so it can be a
group effort. You know, it's this holistic approach. I mean, there's no one quick answer that we could say to say, if you do this, they're going to take their meds. It's like, it's no quick answer, but what we try to do is really just support them. And I think a lot of times things that they've heard from people that they are around, oh, you don't need that medication, you don't need to take that, you don't need to go to school. There's all these influencers around them pushing them in the opposite direction than we want them to go. And then lastly, on the medication piece, one thing that Tina has done in the past is, for example, we'll say, okay, 3 o'clock every day, we'll get on the FaceTime. If they're at school, we'll get on the FaceTime, and, you know, I'll FaceTime with you while you take your meds. And Tina take, like, her blood pressure medicine or something. Like, I'll take my meds, you can take yours, and we can do it together, like trying to make it, you know, not so structured, like try to make it somewhat engaging. One tool that we use for that. But again, I think just being aware of these stigmas, culturally, how they're going to impact your ability to provide services will give you the knowledge of how to find some workarounds despite having these challenges. And I think what I would say, just in terms of the whole talking about your feelings piece, is just to have a normal conversation, you know, to not directly go to, here's my program and we do A, B, and C, and if you come, you know, just making it like a normal conversation just so they can feel you out. They can get a sense of your personality, and then you can get a sense of theirs. And I think once they see that, okay, well, they're not just a case manager, or this isn't just another program, then you'll see a difference in their response. I'll give you 2 tactics that we use that may be helpful for you all. And this is specifically talking about, like, intakes. Because, again, you're in this space where you haven't seen them yet. You know, you might be meeting them in a detention facility. You might be meeting them in a mental health facility. So there is going to be, you know, for that first 5 minutes, you know, this space where are they going to say, get the F out my face? Or are they going to say, okay, well, you got 5 minutes? So when we come in for an intake, let's say it's at a detention facility, and let's say, you know, the correctional officer has already brought that youth into the waiting area. So, you know, you as the case manager, in our case, the survivor services coordinator, you walk into the room, and you always want to present that they're in control here. They have a direct say in how this whole experience is going to go. Because prior to, what has it been? I'm sure you all have either come in with papers, or you observe that when meetings like that happen, they come with their papers, they sit down, and then they immediately get into the intake. And we do that completely different. Sometimes we don't even come in with paper. Because, again, we want them to always not associate with us with other programs that they didn't have the most pleasurable experience with. So we come in with no papers. And then we'll say, okay, how much time do I have? And they haven't heard that before. They've never heard someone coming in to ask them, how much time are you going to give me? And, again, empowering them in this process, giving them a choice in this process. So then they might be like, all right, you have 2 minutes. So we'll actually put 2 minutes on the timer if you're allowed to bring your phone in. Sometimes you're not. So you could put 2 minutes on the timer, or you could just do 2 minutes in your head. But really, that's really just like, again, just to show them that, listen, you know, you have a say-so in this process. And usually what happens is 2 minutes goes by, and 2 minutes turns into an hour or whatever. But those are just a few ways, a few tools, a few tactics rather, that we use. The other thing that we do is, if it's a room where we need to be seated, we'll say, you know, can I sit next to you? Asking them, again, empowering them, letting them know that, you know, I'm not just coming into your space like trying to, you know, run this whole situation. I'm letting you know that I'm here for you, and I want you to let me know, how much time do I have? Can I sit next to you? And they're like, okay, sure. Again, they've probably never been asked that before. So moving on. So overall, discussing mental health with African American youth, you want to be inclusive, you want to be non-judgmental. And again, I think that goes back to what Tina said. I mean, it's definitely a skill that you have to refine and strengthen, where, you know, you see this, for example, you see this crash that's coming, right? You know the crash is coming, and you want to say, stop. No, it's slam on brakes, but you can't say that. And you can't always be so, you can't be quick to impart your perspective, your personal opinion. Although a lot of times the advice that we give them is for more support and it's meant to be supportive, but they may not see it that way. It's going to look like you're being judgmental, and then what happens is they're no longer going to want to open up to you, or they're going to tell you fake stories, and of course you don't want that. So be non-judgmental and avoid victim blaming. With trafficking survivors, you're dealing with survivors that they're going to be in this cycle of abuse. Every situation to them looks different. So they're going to come to you, you know, month 2, month 4, month 6, and you all are probably going to have the same discussion over and over and over again, right? So you're like, okay, we've had this discussion like 3, 4, 5 times. We've talked about this. Why isn't the behavior changing? Be very careful not to victim blame. Be very careful of your words where the message isn't, well, you need to change your behavior. You need to do this. You need to do that. Because always lead with the understanding that trafficking is a long-term therapeutic process. And it's going to take a long time for them to start thinking differently. With me? With me, okay. Are your approaches to health services inclusive of various cultures and communities? Again, our survivors have challenges with basic hygiene. And so in this moment, I want you all to think about a situation where you've had a youth in your program who had some hygiene issues, where it was noticeable. And how did you respond to that situation? Were you able to get them to address it? Did you just ignore it overall? Or did you say something and then their response, was their response defensive? And I think it really is all about your approach and the words you use and your tone. So for us at Courtney's house, when we have a youth who is experiencing some hygiene issues, well, one, we have showers, of course. So if you have a shower in your facility, with this example, one thing that we may do is we may say, oh, girl, we just got some nice smelly good lotion. It's just somebody just donated it from like Bath and Body Works. I know you like smelly good like lotion, so you know I'll put it in the bathroom for you. And here's a towel. And here's a towel and washcloth, and maybe the towel and washcloth is already in the bathroom. Or maybe, you know, our job center aide is preparing food, right? So maybe we're like, oh, well, I know you said you was hungry, so you want to, you know, take a shower before you eat? You know, basically, again, we shy away from anything like you need to take a shower or you stink. Of course, you don't want to say anything like that, but try to frame your approach in more of a question so that they don't receive it in a way where they're like embarrassed, one. Of course, always pull them to the side. And two, you know, try to put it around some nice smelling body wash or new soap that we received or lotion that we received. The other thing that you should be aware with African American youth is this: I took a shower, but I really didn't take a shower, because we see that a lot. Like, oh, I took a shower, and literally the shower was running for like 2 minutes, and there's just no way that you took a shower that fast. So you may need to do a little check, just a quick little sniff there, you know, just to make sure that they properly washed And I think because we really, when we tell the survivors, like, we're a family, like, we don't feel any type of, like, awkwardness to, like, listen, lift up your arms. Like, let me see if you really, like, properly took a bath. But one thing that we can't assume is that, A, they were taught how to properly clean themselves. That's first, especially if there's some sort of severe mental health. So in that case, if you came out of the shower and then we realized that either they still were smelly or it was completely too quick, you know, we would just encourage them to take a shower again. But if they push back, some of these things you just got to let ride because, you know, you don't want to escalate them where they have a, you know, where they get angry. And that just goes back to personal care. You know, these are just things to just be aware of. And so always just have, you know, clean underwear and toiletries, and we have laundry services. So maybe in that situation, again, where that youth is having a hard time bathing, that maybe on wash day when he or she wants to wash her clothes, we may say, oh, okay, well, you know, while your clothes are washing, you want to go ahead, you know, and maybe take a shower? You know, again, just phrasing it in a question. And again, with food, with African-American youth, food is a big part of our culture. And so we have a full food program. Nutrition is a issue for this particular population. So we have meals, and we all sit down at the table. We try our best to make it a no-phone zone when we're at the table eating dinner, but it also presents us the opportunity to take that very relaxed environment when we're all eating to maybe have a quick discussion that can be tied to a therapeutic component. Sometimes one-on-ones happen right then and there where it's like 4-on-ones, I guess. It's like 4 survivors and maybe Tina or our survivor services coordinator. And organically, you'll find opportunities to impart some level of therapy just by engaging with them. And then they don't even know it. They don't even know it. All the while, they're having their one-on-one. They're sharing something that they haven't even shared before, simply off of us sitting down and having a meal together. And so for the sake of time, we're going to move to the last slide for law enforcement. I hope you guys are getting your questions ready, and I'm going to pass this off to Tina.
Well, hello. We're almost time for questions, but I do want to talk about law enforcement before we open up for questions. I know that many of us have heard in the news about racial profiling, about African-American youth being shot over having not an armed weapon at all, getting pulled over and getting shot or killed. And now I'm saying that because I think when we talk about law enforcement, again, culturally, we say, oh, yes, we understand because in other cultures we say how crooked law enforcement is. In other cultures, we say how the police brutality is in another country. And we make it reference to that and we understand it. The thing is, in the African-American community, some of us had Officer Friendly come and visit the school, but didn't see Officer Friendly in the neighborhood. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I was born and raised not to talk to the fire department, not to talk to law enforcement, born and raised by adults inside a foster care system as well who told me this. All African American. Never trust the police, don't say anything, never say anything. And to this day, although I have a great relationship with police now, we're going to talk about what we've done to work on that, I still get nervous in certain areas of driving at night, and even though I know I'm legit. And I need you all to understand that, because back to police and helping in the cultural competency, we did get and we do get racially profiled. So that is not going to make us want to go to the police, even though people are saying the police are nicer and they understand trafficking. It is not going to make you go do that. So you have to change a mindset. So first, I had to change my own mindset. And everything we do at Courtney's house is built off of my life and what was created and what was not there for me. And that's important because law enforcement wasn't. And that was the hardest part for me. And I need you to really understand that I was racially profiled. I had to, as in a survivor, I was pulled over, had to do things I shouldn't have to do for police. So I also had an issue of even wanting to work with them over 10 years. Let's go back to just about 20 years ago. And so I had to start thinking outside the box. When I realized there were still police out there that was good, because 4.2% of African American youth trust the police, they say, compared with 71.5% of white youth. I say 4.2% fans. In my head, I'm trying to count that 4.2%. You can add me to that now, but not as the youth. So I want to explain why and how we had to work on this real issue and getting police to understand. So one of the things we do differently because of that is that I realize something important I tell survivors every day. I realize that I can actually pick and choose the police I work with. I can. And actually we do. And so there is a youth division here in D.C. that has a anti-trafficking division that's funded through FBI inside the youth division, so inside D.C. police. And they were already using the FBI format, meaning we have FBI agents too, that they all work together, right? So a way of, I've been working with them over 15 years now. So now I can help pick those. I can help pick the ones who come to us. Any of the police that works with Courtney's house, meaning any of these cases, they actually come to the center dressed down. They do. And they come to fun events. They do. So they don't just come to talk to a youth. I've been doing this for so long that I don't have some of the same issues that I hear many people have, where the police officer is like, I want my statement right now, and they have to give me everything. So because that does not work, they don't do that here at all. So police come dressed down. I think that's really important. They come to fun events. Police officer needs to be seen as a person, and that person needs to see the youth as a person and a child and understand what they're going through, right? So now they're just seeing them, right? They're not asking questions, and that's the next rule at Courtney's house. I realize I create the rules. So one of the rules is they can't ask them anything about any case or anything when they're coming here for fun, right? This is just to get to know them. And then I stepped it up a notch because I believe that the youth are not seeing their therapists. All of our youth are actually attached to therapy and counseling and therapeutic services. None of them were going. So now we can invite all of our partners to fun events so that they can meet their therapist first and just see them as a person. So that way they're actually going to therapy and actually telling them what's going on. So when the police come, same thing. So now because we do it this way, and we also have a CAC in our area that is a Children Advocacy Center, we work very closely with them. However, sometimes the youth don't disclose the trafficking situation. There are police that are in-house there at the CACs as well. They refer them back to us. Once they get ready to open up and talk to the police can interview them here. That's right here at Courtney's house. We can sit in the room while they're being interviewed. They can start and stop it, but they know the police officer. So now we have a different way of doing things, meaning that now when youth come in and they have to see the police officer, other youth actually say, oh, no, it's like Detective Johnson. He's cool. And they're like, oh, so now another youth vouched that this police is good, right? So now we have a different relationship. We had to build that. We had to work on what relationship to have, right? We had to work within our own district of where we are with our confidential drop-in center location, work with the police, and then pick, like when we make a call and we say that this is an emergency, which officers each shift come to Courtney's house. Yeah, you can do it. You can. And you will be able to. I had to think outside the box that way. How can I do this? Because those officers do have to come in a uniform. Will they come where they can come to my fun event just to say hello and introduce themselves? So when they do come in uniform, because they are an officer, not a detective, will our youth be upset? And so these are the things that's important, especially, and I'm going to say within the Latin American population as well, right? As well as the African American population, knowing that they're not going to be arrested, knowing they're not going to be deported, and who that person is will make them trust to actually build the case. Now, the other piece that we do is I do expert witness testimony on trials, too. That way, we're following the youth and working with the youth at all times. So just remembering police relationships, I really had to go, there are some that will do this. And guess what, guys? I actually don't have a lot of female officers. I think there are like 2 that are on the units that are great. These are actually male officers who are predominantly Caucasian. Well, they're all Caucasian, the male officers. And I think that's important because they had to go through my trainings and talk about culture. And we had to build a relationship because the kids wouldn't trust people I don't trust. Remember that. When the youth are working with you, they're going to look up to you and they're going to protect you more when they start opening up. And they're going to look at you and your relationships towards police, towards lawyers, towards your staff, and they're going to see, and that is going to make them open up more or shut down. Think about that for a moment. So it's important actually to do what you're saying. So I realized that I have to build relationships with the police too so that the youth can also trust. And I have to be honest with these relationships and train to make sure that those messages come across correctly. So we are at the end, and I promise you guys that we're going to open it up to questions. So I am opening it up to questions before we end. We said so much wonderful information. I really just want to know, was this helpful for you all? Was there something that we should expand on for you? Please let us know. So maybe, Jody, would you like to go into the Q&A for us?
Sure. And I know that both you and Felicia have given us so many excellent tips. And as some of our participants are thinking about their questions, maybe if you can think of something specific that you want Tina and Felicia to expand on that they've already covered, or maybe something that you've seen already in your organization that you would like to overcome or could use some tips on.
Great, we're ready. We love questions. We do. Thank you, Martha. I'm glad. And I think we said that, but Brittany and Sophia, you guys were exactly right about why we use 2 washcloths, one for the body and one for the face. And I think just in our culture, just in general, we don't want to use the washcloth that we use for the body, we don't want to use for the face. We got to keep it separate.
All right, and we see a few more people are typing, so we'll give it just a moment for people to finish their questions into the box. And we've got plenty of time for questions, so feel free to think about anything you would like to take this time to ask our experts, Tina and Felicia.
Okay, so someone said, or are you reading the question, Jody?
Oh, go right ahead.
How does Courtney's house create a culture in the house that discourages recruitment? That is a great question. And that's such a great question. Tina, do you want to take that one?
So thank you, Ann. That was a great question. So we all struggle, right, with recruitment. Obviously, I have a few easy things that we do, and then we're going to talk about a conversation. One is we do have signs up. And in our video, we're creating a video of rules for all of our survivors. I said a video. One, because some of our kids have cognitive issues, and I just wanted to be fair. They couldn't read that well. So I wanted to be fair, to go over the rules and really describe recruitment. And none of the youth read the rules. You know that. So the video, they'll definitely watch. So recruitment, I break down what recruitment is. Do you understand that some of our youth don't understand recruitment? Because I didn't. Recruitment means, and this is how I break it down to them, if you take someone else on a move with you to go make some money, that's recruitment. They don't understand, like, working together, that is. Has that happened? Recently, it did happen, and all the youth in the program told me, remember how you building it together as a family? When they told me, I talked to the other youth. She was suspended. She did not recruit. She did ask, well, it was like recruitment to me. She asked both of them if she knew anybody that she could make some money, and the person told me, and she apologized, so she was just suspended. Suspended means for 1 week she still has to do one-on-ones. One-on-ones is counseling over the phone, FaceTime, and she can get food anytime she needs it. She's just suspended for the action. A kick-out. I had a recruitment kick-out where a minor youth was full recruiting on her own, and I had to kick out. And all the other youth came to tell me about it. So, Ann, that's a good question, because remember how we were just talking about building that family? Even though you have a lot of youth, we have, 60 to 70 we work with, you have to build this family, because then the other youth are actually going to come and tell you. So you can even, that way you'll be able to decide how you can deal with that. And is it suspension or will they have to leave? But in that instance of the minor who was 15, was she 15 or 16 at the time, and she was heavily recruiting even her own sister, I did have to put her out the program. In 10 years, I've only had to put 2 people out, though, right, for full-on recruitment. The next question.
Have you considered doing outreach to churches? Yes. The other component of what we do definitely includes training and technical assistance. So the faith-based community not only supports us monetarily, but we also go out and do awareness events and speak to churches, because trafficking happens in churches too. In terms of survivors do go to church, sometimes they might go to church with someone who may be trafficking them or affiliated with the trafficker. And we actually, on the Catholic Church side, this was several years ago, but we did some work with a Catholic church who was having issues with pimps coming into the soup kitchen, recruiting the girls from the soup kitchen. So Tina and a few of our staff at the time and some volunteers actually went to the church, and we were able to identify them based on their shoes. They had like the most. They literally tried to dress as if they were homeless men, but they were so obvious because they had on like Jordan sneakers, and like who's homeless and has on Jordan sneakers that are like super fresh. So yes, to your question, and we do that, and I think it does go a long way because they are part of our eyes and ears out in the community. George, how do we discuss prevention with LGBT youth who engage in survival sex without judging them? Well, the first thing is we've got to really break down survival sex, right? That's the first thing. So that's not a word that we use at Courtney's House, because if you're under the age of 18, there is no survival sex, right? Legally, you cannot sell yourself. And even if you are over the age of 18, the follow-up question that we always ask is, well, when did it begin? Because a lot of times the trafficking began before they became of age. And then secondly, the bigger question to that isn't how do we prevent them from engaging in survival sex. It's about having a conversation about why they felt they were even in a position that they felt like they had to have sex in order to provide clothing or food. Because Tina always says, no, wait, no, that's because that's what adults are supposed to do. Adults are supposed to make sure that you have somewhere to stay safe, that you have clothing, that you have proper nutrition. So we can't, we have to be very careful about talking about survival sex, particularly with minors, because they're children and their needs should be met. And so we can't come up with this word, which basically is just getting away from the responsibilities of their caretaker and their caretaker not doing what they needed to do. So we don't even, I mean, I'm not going to say we act like the word doesn't exist, but again, here at Courtney's House, right, we're talking about child abuse and how to connect that to trafficking, to survival sex. So we don't really use the word survival sex. I mean, it's child abuse. And how do we walk that line and provide youth the support they need? I think that's, again, just having that conversation about, listen, you're 15, you're 16, there's certain things that you should have access to. And it isn't a one-time conversation. This is something that you're going to have to develop within their case management. And if you find that a youth does have this survival sex type of mentality where they're like, oh, well, I can't get it any other way, so I got to get it this way. I mean, that's part of that transition in the mindset, and that's our curriculum that we have at Courtney's house, because it is a mindset that you have to work on to change how they perceive certain situations and certain experiences. Martha, being genuine. Yeah. I think really that's really what it's about. I mean, when they see that you're not presenting your authentic self, why would they present who they really are to be vulnerable? And I think we just, we're just ourselves, and we demonstrate through our actions how much we have their back. So, we're going to court, we're talking to their social worker about the things that they need. When people drop the ball, we're right there with them saying, listen, this is what this person needs. How soon can we make it happen? Always when there's opportunities for you to demonstrate to that youth that you have their back and that they can trust you, you want to take advantage of those, because those are the things that they're going to remember. They're not always going to remember what you say. They're going to remember what you do. No options for.
Thank you. And thank you, George, for explaining that a little bit better so we can come up with that. So same thing with the trans youth, though, right? Because if they're under the age of 18, and let me explain what I mean, because here's what I mean. The reason I even work with boys in trans population is because that's what happened to me amongst it. We left out a whole entire population, I think, in services. For some reason, we do a different services to girls than we do with boys or the trans population. It's like a totally complete different thing. With messaging to girls now is, oh my God, it's sex trafficking if you're doing this and that. But the message to the trans population is, oh, they're trans and they can't get a job with and I'm talking under the age of 18 right now, okay? And what I'm saying is this. What I found is that none of them on the trans population and none of our boys believe they were abused, okay? They didn't understand that these men, when they're young, were sexually abusing them. That's actually important because they don't understand their trauma, right? And the real addiction is the money addiction. All of us had the money addiction. That's what we do. We focus on the money, 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 so we're not focusing on the act. So that's what I talk about to the trans population. And then I talk to jobs and places where they can be who they are and get a job and try to connect those services, right? So that's what Felicia was saying more about that. Like, we need to be on the ground, because I don't believe that that's an excuse with the trans, that they can't get a job and that's why they feel. I feel like we need to work harder so that they can get jobs and be who they are, but also feel happy, because when they're in the life, and this is what our population tells me when they're trans, it's the same that happened to me. Meaning that we disassociate the act and we focus on the money. They're not even physically there during the act. So the issue is replacing this act with money, right? And so we need them to even understand what these emotions are so that they can get good jobs where they are. And then we can advocate very hard for them to get these jobs with who they can be, who they are at all times. Thank you. That was a great, excellent question. I really appreciate that. I'm going to read Brittany's. Brittany Glover, how do Courtney's house deal with keeping the drop-in center private, meaning keeping it away safe from predators or pimps? That is an excellent question. So yes, we have a confidential location. So everyone that's had a confidential location also understands that people talk. There are a lot of creative things I've always done in life, meaning that we put all different types of addresses come up for Courtney's house, and even my personal name that is not mine. So there were certain things you do with that. Kids are going to say something. Sometimes they are. They're going to get dropped off and be lazy, right? And they're going to get dropped off down the street and not the population of where you say. So I think it's important to have consequences as well, meaning, what will happen if this? Understanding why it's a safe space. We go over that. A lot of our youth, after they leave a trafficking situation, 100% of them got into very violent domestic violence situations. So that is something that we work on. We work with police that we can call immediately that will come to our center. If that was the case, we wouldn't even call 911. We would text the officers that we work with that we have a super response. We made sure if we do have to call the police in our area right away, who those people were, like we were saying before then. And then safety, meaning leaving together, noticing cars. There's something that we definitely train on, noticing what the population is. But the number one thing I like the most is that, has that ever happened at Courtney's house? Yes. Have you ever found out? How? The youth told us. And that's what's the most important part of this. This is why it's so important to build these relationships we're telling you. Because I would not know. Let's just be honest. I may not know that someone told a spot. But our other youth told me because they felt like that was wrong. And many of them, it's never just one. It's always more than one that tells you. And that's why it's so important to build that relationship so they feel like they can and that you'll resolve it quickly and that they're help keeping it safe. I hope that answered your question, Brittany.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you so much, everyone. This was an awesome presentation, and we are at the end of the time for the presentation, but we do have some of the contact information up, and I can put that back up on the screen for a moment. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm sure that both Tina and Felicia will be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. So thanks again to everyone. I hope you have an excellent day.